As we're coming, morning and afternoon and evening, everybody, wherever you are. My name is Phil Alexander and I'm the coordinator of these conversations on Zoom. Today we have Jeremiah Lockwood and Rokhl Kafferson and Eléonore Bienzunski, all of whom in their own ways are making striking contributions to contemporary Jewish musical and literary culture. I'll let Jeremiah introduce his discussion partners, but maybe I'll just very quickly introduce Jeremiah. We first met about 4 or 5 years ago at an Association for Jewish Studies conference, and it was in Washington, I think. And I was hearing Jeremiah's paper. I was very struck by the skillful and scholarly, but also very passionate way that he brought together his deep knowledge of Jewish liturgical music tradition with a desire to understand how that tradition or those traditions operate within and are framed by a contemporary social and cultural context. Since then, Jeremiah's gone on to receive his PhD. He's currently working as a research fellow at the Lowell Milken Center for Jewish Music, and he's also working closely with the remarkable archive of Cantor Robert Kieval, which is a project that we're going to hear more about at some point in 2022. And I think I'll hand over to Jeremiah, Rokhl, and Eléonore.
Thank you very much, Phil, for the kind words, and also for organizing COZ this year. It's been a pleasure to be involved with various activities of this international group of Jewish music scholars over the course of the pandemic period. And it's wonderful to be seeing faces of people who have kind of become familiar almost exclusively through this Zoom format. So thank you so much for hosting me today. I'm going to talk today about a new project that I have been doing kind of an extension of the research that I've been doing over the last years, my PhD research on new Jewish music in the Hasidic community, which was complemented by archival research about the golden age, quote, golden age period of cantorial music, the gramophone era, chazonos, which is the kind of the source material that the young Hasidic cantors who I am writing about draw upon. So as an extension of that work in my new position as a research fellow at the Milken Center, I'm writing kind of two strands of research. I am doing new ethnographies with musicians in a variety of New York Jewish music scenes, some who are in the Orthodox community and some who are most decidedly not. So I'm kind of bridging out to try to cover the spectrum of Jewish musical experience in New York. And then I'm also continuing my archival research through a specific project. I'm translating parts of Zavel Kvartan's 1952 autobiographies. Kvartan, as many or all of you know, is one of the first international stars of Jewish music, one of the first cantors to record, and kind of a towering figure in 20th century Jewish music. Certainly a major inspiration for me in my creative projects and also in my research. So I'll just spend 1 second showing you all I'll share screen for one moment. This is the main page for the Milken Center Conversations. Conversations is the name of my blog, and as you can see, there's some visual branding here. The Kvartan project. I'm now in getting into maybe a quarter of the way through the book, and I encourage you all to stop in here at some point. I'll put a link to this in the chat, and if you haven't already, I'd be honored for you to take a look at this project. And then there are also, as you can see, a recurring column that I'm calling Dispatches from Brooklyn, which is the kind of heading for this ethnographic work that I've been doing. And so in that part of the blog, I've written essays recently about Rokhl Kafferson and Eléonore Bienzunski. And I should have asked you guys beforehand. Do either of you have a desire to go first or second, or maybe it doesn't? Maybe that doesn't really matter so much. All right, Rokhl, let's start with you. Is that okay? Okay, so Rokhl Kafferson is a playwright, a cultural critic about Jewish culture and especially about Yiddish culture. She's a Yiddishist, someone who's taught about Yiddish literature and about her own creative projects and the use of Yiddish in new Jewish creative projects. And recently, she has also taken a foray into the world of songwriting in Yiddish. So maybe before we begin a conversation with Rokhl, I'd love to play Rokhl's song. This is a song called "Kum zu mir," and this is a collaboration with some very well-known figures in the Jewish music world: Sasha Luria, Craig Udelman, and Lawrence Glamberg. And let's take a listen to this piece. Okay.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Es ist Shabbos doch, eins ist gier, dein Kohl klingt Molechein. Kiddisch machst du wunderlich und dein Pfanne lichtig schön. No Kerzel, noch a Gläsel, Maschke Wein, sie Bier, Kerzelos, oh, ist die Moizzi, komm zu mir. Los, oh, ist die Moizzi, komm zu mir. Ich hab sie eingetäubelt in der Mikve, nur für dich. Mir ruft dich an in Tzadi, an den Shabbos, an Ashir. Jetzt los, oh, ist die Moizzi, komm zu mir. Los, oh, ist die Moizzi, komm zu mir. Ich hab sie eingetrunken in der Mikve, nur für dich. Mir ruft dich an in Tzadi, an den Shabbos, an Ashir. Jetzt los, oh, ist die Moizzi, komm zu mir. Los, oh, ist die Moizzi, komm zu mir. Good Shabbos, Jimmy.
All right. Yeah, well, that's wonderful and charming. Rokhl, well, first of all, thank you so much for being here today. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about Yiddish parody songs? And just to make clear, in case people are not aware, this song is based on a Jimmy Buffett song. Is a wild and kind of almost surreal choice for a contrafacta with Yiddish lyrics. So can you contextualize this a little bit for us in the history of Yiddish parody songs, and talk about some of the inspirations that brought you to creating this piece?
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I would say the most direct inspiration for this particular song is definitely Mickey Katz. Mickey Katz is an idol of mine, I would even say, one of my favorite recording artists. You know, he was a wonderful musician. He had great taste. So he brought together these incredible studio musicians, and he recorded tons of parody songs. But well, let me just say that, like, growing up in the 80s, in the age of Weird Al and Dr. Demento, I feel like parody songs got a little bit of a bad rep. I know I'm going to offend the Weird Al fans in the audience, so I apologize for that. Parody can be sophisticated, it can be very simple, whatever. And what Mickey Katz did was he didn't just, insert Jewish words for non-Jewish words, or, do kind of an obvious takeoff. He transformed the material. He took American songs and he would typically translate maybe half of them into Yiddish, but he would make them Jewish. They became a sort of commentary, or even really a subversion of the, sort of bland American pop that was on the radio. And he snuck in these very interesting critiques and takes on mainstream American culture. And he did that both with the lyrics as well as with the music. So there was this sonic element to it where there were always these like incredibly wild klezmer breaks, and then, juxtaposed with like the tune to, how much is that doggy in the window? Right? Like, it's absurd. It's absurd and wonderful in the way that, I really love and I really respond to. So, you have a novelty song, right? So I'm already like, I'm interested. There's this attraction and repulsion for me with novelty songs. I kind of love them, and I'm kind of a snob, and I kind of hate them. And Jimmy Buffett wrote Why Don't We Get Drunk as a novelty, like he intended to write a novelty song that people would put on the jukebox. And I think originally he didn't even put his own name on it. I think he used a pseudonym. So I'm really interested in using funny and disarming texts in order to do something interesting, whether to make a critique on the mainstream culture or to make a critique and create new Jewish culture.
Thank you, Rokhl. That's fantastic context. So thinking about Mickey Katz, where he's doing these kind of savaging American pop culture for the sake of to create an in-joke with other Jewish Americans, and he uses Yiddish as a mutually intelligible code with his audience. But I think your song is doing something a little different, right? Because it's not necessarily written for Yiddish speakers, right? I mean, it's or the intended audience includes, let's say, at least includes a healthy number of people who probably do not speak Yiddish, and for whom the code is not intelligible without some kind of mediation, some kind of translation. So who are you writing for? And then maybe also, what are you writing against? What are the forces in American culture that you feel you need to comment upon or do some kind of intervention with through doing something like writing a Yiddish language country song?
Well, okay. So first of all, the person that I'm writing for always is me. So this is the kind of song that I would want to hear. I knew that this was the kind of tune that was ripe for a klezmer interpretation because it could have a fiddle break. And I know so many wonderful klezmer fiddlers, like Craig is just amazing, genius. And then, so obviously I'm writing for myself, and then I'm writing for my friends who, I would drive up to Klez Canada with, and we would, talk about something like this and play it. Like, that's the immediate audience. And then of course I want American Jews to hear the song, and I wanted it to be accessible. So, everybody uses YouTube these days. And, in a way, YouTube is a wonderful place for bilingual, trilingual material because they've made captioning really easy. They have all these, auto-generated captioning. You have all these digital tools which are used for accessibility of a certain kind. It's expected to be accessibility, but you can also use them for bilingual projects, which I think is really great and really interesting. So what did I want to do? I want to push back a little bit on very sort of simplistic, the way that Yiddish is used, if at all, in parody songs in this very kind of simplistic, kind of cringy way, like Two Live Jews, Oi, was I thirsty? Like it's a parody on Two Live Crew. I happen to love Two Live Crew, okay? And I think they deserve better than that. You can parody anything, right? I would love to hear a good Yiddish parody of Two Live Crew. I mean, I would give my left arm to hear that, okay? Two Live Jews is not that. Anything can be good if it's done intelligently. So I wanted to do something that took the original material and did something interesting and very Jewish with it and transformed it into a Jewish text. And I liked the Jimmy Buffett song because it's really simple. Even though the whole thing is in Yiddish, it's not dumbed down in any way. Even if you don't speak Yiddish, you can follow along, like on YouTube, you can follow the words, and it's really quite simple. You could sing along and look at the words and feel like you're getting some kind of knowledge of Yiddish as a vernacular. And that's really important to me as an ideologue, let's say.
So you mentioned that you of yourself as an ideologue. Can you talk a little bit about what is your ideology of Yiddish? What do you personally hope to gain from your use of the Yiddish language? And how is the use of a Jewish language? What are its tensions with the Jewish culture that you were born into and that you grew up with?
Okay, so, I consider myself an ideologue in the sense that, I'm not a pedagogue, I'm not a teacher, and I have an ideology, which is that American Jews need Yiddish. Now, obviously, not all American Jews are going to be interested in Yiddish because for many of them, it's not their heritage, and that's really fine. I know this is sort of a complicated conversation, so let me just say that I'm not trying to impose Yiddish on anyone. God forbid. But the majority of American Jews are of Ashkenazi descent. And for many, many of them, Yiddish is a heritage language or could be a heritage language. And I feel like to build in the future, there is this enormous lack of self-knowledge and history. And people need it. People need that history. They need Jewish languages. They need texts. They need all of these things. They need music. So what do I want to do with this song? Well, first of all, it's a great song. My friends are incredibly talented. It's fun to hear them. And it is a bit of propaganda in the sense that, the world I was born into, in the suburbs of Long Island in the 80s, Yiddish was a punchline. It was Oi, was I thirsty, Two Live Jews. Like that was really that was the extent of the humor. It was not very sophisticated. It was not interesting, and it was a turnoff. And to me, this is a bit of a revenge or a return of the repressed. And I want to show that it can be interesting, and I want people to be intrigued by it and to want to go further. And to say that, that was not the only thing that we could do.
Now you talked a little bit about the role of klezmer music the role klezmer music plays in your ideology of Yiddish culture and its use in constructing something new and something more serious, something more substantive in American Jewish life. Can you tell me a little bit about your involvement with klezmer music? And up until creating this song, you were not yourself a musician or a practitioner, and you've kind of created now a role for yourself doing that. Talk about a little bit about your process of coming to songwriting and what benefits you see from songwriting as opposed to other forms of other genres that you work in as a writer.
Well, so first of all, for me as I always say sort of ironically, as a born again Yiddishist, is it Saul on the road to Tarsus? Like Saul turns into Paul, right? Like, there's that moment of epiphany where you have a conversion, right? Like, and your life takes a totally different path. And for me, that was, hearing the Klezmatics on a CD, because it was the 90s and Garrison Keillor had klezmer bands on a Prairie Home Companion. I mean, I don't really care for Garrison Keillor, but God bless him. He brought mainstream. He brought klezmer mainstream, and I really feel like we don't talk about that enough. That was a really big deal. So that I could, in my suburban town, I could go to the bookstore and there was a little world music section, and there would be a klezmatic CD and a klezmer conservatory CD. And before the internet, like without that, I never ever would have heard that stuff. So hearing that and like having that realization that there was Jewish music out there that was exciting and it was sexy and it was edgy and it had jazz and it had, you know, the East Village, and it had politics, you know, and it had politics that had nothing to do with what I understood to be Jewish life. I was like, you know, what's going on? What is going on? So for me, you know, I was very obsessed with music anyway. I was a musician, but like, you know, I wasn't a good musician. So I saw the world, my lens was through music. And obviously it will be different for everybody. For a lot of people who do relate to the world, you know, through music, I think connecting to Yiddish culture through music is incredibly powerful. And I say that because it was for me. I mean, obviously not everybody will have that experience. So, you know, I always sort of saw songwriting as something that other people did because I can't sing. I sound like Lady Yoda. Sorry. And I can't sing and I have terrible pitch. I thought, oh, songwriting, other people do that. And then sort of during the pandemic, I think a lot of people had this realization like, well, I don't know, maybe I can do that thing that I never thought I could do. Like I dyed my hair blonde. Like, I don't know. I never thought I could do that either. And I was, you know, I took part in a panel about Dan Kahn's translation of This Land Is Your Land into Yiddish, which was a very nice translation. And, you know, I got to thinking like all my friends had done it and I hadn't. And I thought, I don't know, well, maybe I can. So I tried it and I did. I mean, it wasn't easy. It, you know, it's translating from English into idiomatic Yiddish is a skill. And it's something that I want to work on, and it doesn't come naturally to me. So I'm not saying it was easy, but it was more a matter of believing that I could do it, as with many things in life.
So, Rokhl, can you talk a little bit about some of your other creative projects that you're working on in the past years, and what's on the horizon?
So for many years, I had worked as a super title operator at various Yiddish theaters in New York City. And that means that, you know, in order to have super titles at the Yiddish theater, you have somebody sitting in the back in the control room or in the back of the theater, and they have a laptop and they're moving through the slides of the PowerPoint presentation, which can be very tricky. It's generally pretty mechanical, but can be pretty tricky. And it's the kind of experience where, like, if you sit through all, you know, 70 performances of a Yiddish play, you're going to know it pretty well at the end. So it's kind of deepened your experience of whatever play it is. It kind of makes you think about theater. You get to watch the audience's reactions. And it's the kind of thing where if you do it enough, you start to think, huh, all right, I could do that. And, you know, as with many things, like I love classic Yiddish theater. I love Mickey Katz, but I wanted to take those approaches and take those ideas, and I wanted to see new interpretations of those things. So a couple of years ago, I wrote my first play, which nobody asked for, but I wrote it anyway. And I was thinking, you know, I had to think of, well, you know, if I wanted to write a play that was in Yiddish and English, where would it be set? So I decided it would be Holocaust survivors living in Brooklyn in 1950. And that was a really interesting experience. I taught myself how to write a play. And then I just wrote a second play. I was a fellow at the 14th Street Y, and I wrote a play called Shtuma Shabbos, which is about a young grad student who's studying ethnography. And she discovers that there's a 90-year-old Yiddish actress living down the block from her who may or may not possess a lost Yiddish play that caused a riot in its one performance in 1938 in Warsaw. So it's got all the themes that I love, and it's bilingual, and especially with this new play, I get to sort of talk about people like me and my friends and my colleagues in Yiddish land and our projects and what it means to work in Yiddish today, like from the inside, because I'm so frankly kind of exhausted of hearing what other people think about Yiddish, people from the outside, what they think doing Yiddish today means. I'm much more interested in portraying that myself. And I found that even though I'm primarily a nonfiction writer, there are definitely things you can do with fiction that you can't do with nonfiction.
I don't think I made that clear enough at the beginning of our conversation. Rokhl is perhaps best known as a regular columnist for Tablet, the online journal, where she writes a bi-monthly column about Yiddish culture and cultural life in New York City. And I'll put in the chat here a link to her column that you can all check that out. And of late, you've had a bunch of really, really wonderful columns about Jewish music, and it seems that music is kind of increasing as in the bandwidth that it takes up in your world. I think we're gonna, maybe this will be the last question then before we chat with Eléonore. But can you tell us a little bit about the role of music in upcoming projects, or thoughts, fantasies, inclinations about the future of Jewish music?
Well, I think like a lot of us, I'm sort of sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for music to fully return to New York City. I mean, there's live music. I've gone to see you perform, Jeremiah, which has been amazing. And Eléonore, I know, has been performing a ton. But still, I've lived in New York for over 20 years, and I'm used to having a Jewish music scene where you could go like at least once or twice a week and hear incredible klezmer music. And it was just like such a, important part of my life. And without that for the last year and a half, it's been very, kind of strange and whatever. We don't have to talk about that. But my latest project is that I was very obviously excited and gratified by the reception of the song that I wrote. And I want to write a second song. And I recently reviewed a new translation of a Sholem Aleichem novella called Muscular, Muscular the Thief. And it's about this guy who's like, sort of this real muscular Jew, and he rides around on a horse like a Kazakh. And he rescues a Jewish girl, like a Chava type girl from a monastery. She's about to marry a non-Jew. And I thought, oh, this guy would be it would be great to write a ballad, like a blues ballad about him. So that's something I'm playing with. And, again, it's like the normal, like, oh, I'm not a songwriter. What am I doing? I can't do that. Yes, I can. So most of it is just wrestling with myself and convincing myself that it's going to be fun and people are going to enjoy it. The Ballad of Muscular. So hopefully, email me and tell me you're waiting for it, and then it'll get done.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to that, and also just the wonderful reception of your first song. Your first song was kind of a hit, right? I mean, for your first piece of music to be performed by a member of the Klezmatics and other really wonderful artists working on a very high level in the field. So it's obviously there's a place for what you're doing, and it's great to see your talents and your brilliant insight into contemporary Jewish life spreading around into other corners of the world. So thank you so much, Rokhl.
Well, thank you, Jeremiah. And I just want to say, like, I am literally nothing without my colleagues here in Yiddish land, Eléonore included, you included, and Sasha and Lawrence Glamberg and Craig. Whether we live in Brooklyn or not, our hearts are in Brooklyn, and we depend on each other and we build each other up. Our projects are not, things that are created in a vacuum, and we are important to each other. Okay, that's it.
That's amazing. Thank you. All right, so Rokhl, if you can stick around, we'd love to. Later on there'll be time for Q&A with the folks, so that'd be great. But if someone did a nice thing and pinned me and Rokhl, and if you could pin Eléonore to the screen now, and maybe let Rokhl regain her comparative anonymity. So, okay, amazing. All right, so I have the honor and privilege of having here Eléonore Bienzunski, sound archivist at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, klezmer violinist, songwriter, band leader, and I recently interviewed Eléonore and wrote an article about some of her recent projects. Especially a song that she wrote, which I would love to begin by playing for you. So I'm going to share screen again and bring you a recent song by Eléonore. This is called Chemodan, and it won an award recently. It was the winner of the Bubby Award award for new Yiddish song. So I'm going to play this now for you all, and here we are.
Sorry, no problem. I just have to move my shoes. I never know where I put my shoes. I always take them off. I hate shoes. Yeah. No, shoes.
Thank you, Eleanor, for that beautiful song. And I want to begin by asking you, maybe taking a step away from the song. We'll come back to it, but first talking a little bit about your work as a sound archivist, and if it's and you're then appropriately so, you're right there in the heart of the belly of the beast. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy of the archive, what you believe archives can achieve, and how you have sought to go about realizing that philosophy, both in your work, especially through in the efforts of the Ruth Rubin archive, that a wonderful project that came online a few years ago, and then as it pertains to your creative projects.
Thank you for having me, and it was fascinating to hear Rokhl and you chatting before. About the archive, so I just finished a dissertation, writing a dissertation on that topic, about the history of the YIVO Sound Archive, and that led me to think a lot about this question. Before that, I was already using the archive just as other musicians who have inspired me have done also, to find material for performing, and especially the Ruth Rubin collection, which is a folklore collection of around 2,000 or 20, well, closer to 2,500 songs actually, that Ruth Rubin collected starting in the late 1940s up until the early 80s, and in North America. So, and it's a treasure of songs that if she hadn't collected, some of them wouldn't have reached us. So for me, the archive, it's a way to discover new things in the old things, for one, but also the sound archive at YIVO, it was created in the early 80s, just when, and by the same people who were trying to revive klezmer music. Most of them were coming from American folk music, bluegrass, and there was a need to access the old recordings that were scattered among the YIVO collections, and together with scholars and musicians, and there was some institutional opportunity at the same time to create the sound archive, and that's how it happened. So for me, the archive is very much a living space. It's my main claim in my dissertation, really, that it's a living space, and especially the YIVO Sound Archive wouldn't have existed if not for the klezmer revival, or call that, and the revitalization of klezmer music that happened and wouldn't have been possible without the access of these old recordings. So there is a loop, and it's continuous. The bands of the revival era and then going on have been using archival material to create new things. So yeah, for me, it's like a ground. It's like a fertile ground. It's a living space, and yeah, it's like many things. Also, a little bit of archaeology, a little bit of also, and rediscovering some strata of knowledge that we could lose if we don't do this work.
So the archives have a reputation as being inaccessible, as being guarded in some ways by gatekeepers of knowledge. And do you think there's kind of a generational shift taking place in terms of attitudes about how to make the archive accessible, or so I'm comparing, for example, the experience of going to the archive that I had as a young person, where I felt that I was being dissuaded basically from coming and working there, to the point where we are now, where holdings like the Ruth Rubin archive are completely online and are accessible to anyone from their own homes. Can you talk about how that fits into institutional shifts, about how institutions see their role in disseminating information, and also what role, if any, you've seen the move to an online space having on new musical endeavors by creative artists outside of academia?
Yeah, well, I mean, technology, of course, enables a lot of access that was not possible in the past. And there is definitely a shift. Archives have traditionally been places where there was a mix of professionals and amateurs working in them. And I think there is generally a professionalization of the profession itself of archivist. So that's one thing. And yes, the ability to isolate collections and prioritize them and give them the care they need in terms of digitizing them, creating this descriptive metadata, which is the description. We need to understand, to branch it out to their context. And just to explain whatever artifact we have in front of us. So this project, so now archives generally operate like that by projects. So, and this is what's happening here at YIVO. So we just finished digitizing YIVO's folk song project, which is another collection similar to Ruth Rubin collection. That was conducted by Barbara Kirschenbad-Gimblet in the 1970s. Together with, she trained a group of graduate students to do ethnographical field recordings. And the very interesting aspect of this collection is that it also had the purpose of collecting context, a lot of contextual information. So there's a lot of oral history accompanying the collection of the songs themselves. So that's very exciting. And it's going to be accessible through the general archive portal. So at least the first stage, there won't be like a fancy website like for the Ruth Rubin collection, but everything's going to be accessible this way. So, and searchable. And so that's very exciting development. And sections of the archives are being slowly digitized and made available. Then there are restrictions that can apply to certain collections, but and for the sound recordings, the priority is on the magnetic tapes, whether audio cassettes or reels, because they are more fragile material, and if they're not digitized, they are more at risk. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but no,
it definitely. Well, it's wonderful to hear about the projects that are unfolding, especially the Yiddish song project. I mean, I think that's there's a lot of power in the music that's collected there, and what you're describing sounds like just really incredible resource. And I guess I'm sort of gesturing towards what I really want to talk to you about, which is the role that the archive has played in your creative life, and how you've used archival sources as a performer of historic genres of Jewish music. And also, I want to sort of gradually pivot towards the topic of our previous conversation and the article I wrote about you, which was a wonderful kind of family archival piece, this cassette tape of your great grandfather singing. And if you would, would you mind telling us a little bit about this recording and
Sure.
how it was found and something about its history?
Sure. Well, just to go back to the archives and how they influence. So in 2014, I attended a workshop that Lawrence Klamberg was leading on Ruth Rubin repertoire, and I started learning. I mean, I first heard of her at Bayless Schertas Gottesman's Zingerei in the Bronx, and I really was interested by a song, and I asked Itzik, where is this from? And he told me, this is Ruth Rubin, this is on this album. So I went to the sound archive that was like, I don't know, many years ago, and that's how I heard her album of love songs from which. And so, but in 2014, when I went to this workshop, I thought, okay, I want to sing these songs, and I'm going to put together a project around this. And so I was living in France at the time, and I gathered a group of musicians, and we recorded an album that is on the label of the Institut Européen de Musique Juive in Paris. And we toured a little bit. And so that project is called YIVO. And okay, maybe that is kind of interesting too, in terms of how I see the archives. Is the reason I chose the name Yerushe, which means heritage, was a little bit of an ironic or almost sarcastic approach to it, because there is one song in the Ruth Rubin collections that says, the profession I learned by heritage, I inherited the profession that I cannot take, but I cannot steal, but I mustn't steal, but I can take. And I felt like, so it's a thief song, it's a poverty song, and it describes the whole family and how they don't, they don't steal, but they, God forbid, but they take. And I felt like as a folk musician, as a folk singer, this is what we do. We're not stealing it. It's ours. It's our heritage, but we take. So I thought I would do that with the Ruth Rubin collection. And so that's why it's called Yerushe. So it's not just about the weight of an heritage, but also it's a little bit of a flip.
No, I think that's a great metaphor for how ideas recirculate. I mean, it's not a crime exactly. Appropriation is not necessarily the same as crime, right? It's a form of learning. It's a way that we are able to make the old new again, is through circulating ideas in this way. And it's not recreating the past or reviving the past as much as using elements of the past towards some goal in the present. And so I think that's the use of the word heritage to name your a folk revival band is very funny. It's great. So you had a relationship with Ruth Rubin going back quite a ways before you started working on. Right.
I mean, I never met her, but yes.
She died before.
She's been accompanying my path as a musician very deeply, and but just to rebound on what you just said, like and that was part of our conversation we had in the interviews, like the lineages that we connect to. Some of them we inherit, and we have to decide what we do with it. Either we embrace them or we take distance or whatever, like with any heritage. But there are lineages that we choose to take from. And so all these, Ruth Rubin and Baile Scherter Gottesman and other, especially women singers. So the one that I didn't choose but isn't part of my heritage is my great grandfather. Right. But that was a discovery for me. So do you want me to talk about this tape?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think that yeah, I mean, you've kind of you've given us the crux of it already, which but yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about, so that, I mean, I think there's this kind of expectation that a Jewish folk singer will be exploring their heritage, but the heritage that ends up being explored is oftentimes not related to one's biological heritage, but rather towards it's an aspirational kind of like the heritage we desire, or that we imagine or hope that our past might have included. But there's a kind of a fair amount of myth making involved in creating this heritage. And then now we're maybe on the cusp of contrasting that with a little bit of kind of like a biologically determined heritage that you have in your family as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the story of this?
Yes, so it was a surprise. Like a couple months ago, my mother and I were both in Paris, and my mother was helping my aunt cleaning up some stuff, and my mom kind of salvaged these two tapes, which I brought back and listened to, and it was, so there was just written on them "Mon père," my father, handwritten by my grandfather. So that was it, and there was on them there was about 15 minutes of my great grandfather singing liturgical music, which well, first of all, it was the first time I ever heard his voice, but also, which was very moving, of course, but also maybe I had heard that he had some kind of contours, but it was not part of my awareness, really. So it was a discovery for me that someone in my direct ancestry was actually trained and was singing liturgical music. So it was a interesting, it was an interesting discovery for me.
Do you want to talk about the kind of the controversy within your family about this, the provenance of the music? I mean, we don't have to, but it's
yeah, well, I mean, I was very close to my grandfather, who was from Lithuania, from both my grandparents who were from Lithuania, and but so this great grandfather had abandoned his family and came to France. It's a long story. Actually, my grandfather wrote his memoirs called The Odyssey of an Apple Thief, and that is a very worthwhile read. A very interesting book, and not just I don't say this just because it's my grandfather, but I think it's a great book. And so he tells about that. So yeah, there was estrangement, or like difficult. I didn't know much about this great grandfather because the relationship with my grandfather, who I was very close to, was a little fraught because of that past. So it was also an interesting personal thing for me to reconnect with, in terms of kind of like stepping away from issue of forgiveness. It was just like, okay, here is this tape and this voice, and it was decontextualized in a way, and I could relate to the music in it.
On the theme of kind of disembodied voices or voice visitations from the past, you have a story about the creation of the song that we listened to at the beginning of our conversation. Would you care to share something about how you wrote that song?
Sure. Yeah, that was pretty amazing. So in November 2013. I woke up one night and I had those words, and in Yiddish going around in my head. And so I got up and I wrote them down. And in the morning, the next morning, I learned that Ballad Gottesman had passed just that night. So, I mean, I usually don't wake up at night unless there's loud sound or something. But I mean, and so, yeah, it was like really kind of uncanny that I would wake up and write those words. And there were Yiddish words and there were very poetic words. And so, yeah, there was some kind of communication that happened at the very moment, I think, when Bela Gottesman was dying. And I didn't know she was sick. I was in France. She was here in the Bronx. So, I mean, I had met her. I had a connection with her, but I was not in touch at that moment specifically with the family. I didn't know what was happening with her. So it was kind of a beautiful, I don't know, I don't want to call it a message, but like a beautiful sort of communication somehow that happened. And so later I brought it to Weimar. There was a workshop on a new Yiddish culture and new Yiddish music. And at the time I was actually doing ethnography on newly composed Yiddish songs and composers of Yiddish songs. So I interviewed a lot of them, which I think also inspired me a lot. But so I reworked a little bit on the words with Joshua Oletsky, with Daniel Kahn, who are teaching these workshops, and at Class Canada also. So I reworked a little bit this. And as Rokhl said, I mean, the community is like so important, and we're just learning from each other constantly so much, and it's such a generous community. So there was that, and only last year, during the pandemic, in the last fall, like the music came. So it's like years later that the music kind of, because I had written the song with a little yamtiramti yamtirai in between the verses. So that led to something musically that had to be like yamtiramti ramtaramti, something like that. And I was just not working. I was trying to write the music for this and that was not working. And then I realized I don't need this. And this is not how this song goes. So I ended up writing a completely different melody that is inspired by many other things that I listen to and that are not specifically Yiddish. And I realized also like, okay, I need to write a song that feels good to me and that is in my own language or languages.
Thank you, Eléonore. I think that whole anecdote about how this beautiful kind of quasi mystical story about how the song came to you, and then also the process of how you took this kind of visitation of something was from the past or imagined as being coming from the Jewish past, and then transformed it through your own creative process. I mean, there's an allegory there about the role of the archive and how it is how it needs to be intentionally transformed, but perhaps in ways that kind of are not always apparent to us, even for people who are doing this kind of work. It's not always obvious what's happening while you're doing it, but somehow these kinds of relationships with the past, either through people who elder musicians or elders in our families, or through documents, they are kind of appropriated into us. They become part of us, and then we spit them back out, translated through our bodies and through our experiences. And so the work that you're doing as an artist, but also the work that you're doing as a person who is creating new archival spaces in which people can be creative. These two halves of your professional life are very intimately connected, and there's just a there's a strong story in the way these parts of what you do connect to each other, and it's a wonderful example of how the archives can live, right? And what you are writing your scholarship about is in a way it's almost like you're writing your autobiography by writing about these historic spaces.
I leave that to someone else.
Yeah. Well, I also there's some kind of sense that any deeply impassioned scholarly research is on some level comes back to oneself in some ways, and we are implicated in our own projects.
No, that's for sure.
Well, I think maybe that's a good place to stop for now.
I want to thank you very much for your perspective also on our stories and our creation, because they're very interesting to reflect upon. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm grateful to get to know you and Rokhl and to have a chance to talk about the world, but through the lens of looking at what you do, and so it's I am grateful for your indulgence in giving me your time and agreeing to let me write about you. So thank you. All right. Well, if folks who are in the Zoom would care to get involved in the conversation, maybe now, if I have leave from Phil, from the organizer, if maybe would anyone like to jump in with any questions for Rokhl or Eléonore or myself? No pressure if nobody wants to. we could end it right there as well, if that's Malcolm.
I'll jump in with one then. I think looking at what Eléonore is doing and what Rokhl is doing, continually this bringing the archive into dialogue with contemporary creative life, that does seem to be shifting. I think, Jeremiah, you spoke to that very clearly by saying that when you were younger, the archive was a kind of forbidding place that you were sort of encouraged to keep your distance from. And it seems to me that with the move online, brought into focus a bit over the last couple of years because of the pandemic and the need to kind of make these resources transnational through internet and online kind of connections. And that is spurring or continuing a great creative trend. I wonder, Jeremiah, if you could tell us a bit about whether that applies to your own work at the moment in your relationship with archival materials.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, I think there's a fair amount of overlap for me with the work that I do with Eléonore and Rokhl in terms of having a kind of activist orientation, in terms of believing that there's something in the past that we need in the present, that there are voices that have either intentionally or through neglect been obscured, that speak in a kind of a radical way about Jewish life or about the possibilities of maintaining an identity that is in multiple worlds at the same time, whether those worlds be religious and secular, or Jewish and non-Jewish, or kind of otherworldly and radically political. That those kinds of juxtapositions, which were a big part of the intellectual and spiritual life of Jews in the kind of in the Yiddish-speaking kind of, let's say, pre-Holocaust era, that there's some kind of a story there that is valuable for creative projects in the present moment, and that speaks with a certain kind of vibrancy towards issues in my life, and that I think are important in the contemporary moment. So my focus is on Chazonos, which is this kind of is the Yiddish term for cantorial music that I use as a shorthand for the gramophone era, kind of the early 20th century cantors. And I'm interested in the way Jewish artists were leaders of the religious and sacred experience, that are musicians who had kind of complex identities that were involved in multiple different spheres of music making, who were both had a foot in orthodoxy and in other aspects of Jewish life, whether they be political movements or aesthetic movements, were able to bring in their multiple identities into a communal space that was understood as valuable to a broad Jewish public. And so I'm writing about the image of the cantor as is used, as is manipulated by artists today, especially young Hasidic singers, for whom chazonis and early 20th century Jewish liturgical music is kind of a touchstone for creative projects that they're working on, and for myself as a composer and a singer.
Just going to come in back on that. I very much like this idea of the changing role of the archive moving to something as a kind of active part of a network. And I think it's a bit like Rokhl was saying about that it's the return of the repressed a little bit, that the things, previously where archives have been sort of storage spaces of, bounded spaces, this idea that they kind of open up and have some agency of their own and bring in an element of unpredictability into the creative process, because you don't know where they're going to go or where they're going to rebound. I find that really exciting. Do you want to take these questions from here? There's some
I see one in the chat. Maybe let's start with that. From Pamela Grossman. Hi, Pam. It's nice that you're here. Thank you for coming. And Pam asks, I would love to hear from Eléonore and Rokhl about the evolving role of women in scare quotes traditional Jewish practice and music. Do you hit stumbling blocks with some communities as a woman?
I want to speak to this first, and then I'm sure Eléonore has something to say. I'm not a performer, so maybe in a way it's not my place to say whether or not performers hit stumbling blocks. But, the impulse for me to write this song, which is specifically from a Jewish woman's point of view, she's singing, theoretically, she's talking about her husband who is making Kiddush, and yet he's silent. We don't hear from him. It's all from her point of view. And sort of the background on that is having subscribed to the Jewish music listserv for many, many years. And Mark, maybe this will be familiar to you. Every couple years, or maybe it felt like every couple of months, there would be this, flare up where somebody would bring up the topic of Kol Isha, like I'm a musician and my band just got hired to play at the synagogue and they told us we can't have our woman singer. And then forget it, flames for months about this incredibly incendiary topic about whether women musicians could be heard in Jewish spaces. And, it was frustrating and annoying and funny. Writing a song from a Jewish woman's point of view, for me, was a little bit definitely in the back of my mind that I wanted to create repertoire that could only be, it could be sung by anyone, but it's about inserting, very affirmatively inserting a woman's voice back into the Jewish music canon, and especially in Yiddish.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And the song is amazing that way. Even though you're not usually a performer, I imagine that you could still, if there are stumbling blocks out there, as you mentioned, you could still hit them even as a writer and an interviewer, but you're dealing with that. And thank you. The song is incredible.
I'm so glad you like it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to also respond to this, I also feel like in the traditional folk song repertoire, there are a lot of women's stories and other voices of women from the past who are singing through those songs. So, and sometimes I feel more or less, sometimes I feel very close to their stories. sometimes I feel more removed. Sometimes it's different context, but I like that, how you say, décalage, this this one is hard to translate. Okay, this sort of shift in perspective. Also, of course, yeah, there are places where it's been not possible to sing, and it can be frustrating. But I stay away from places when I'm going to be rejected for that kind of reason, so I don't experience it really. And I feel like I've been very respected as a band leader in my experience, and working with other men too, and maybe now in the US, working also more with women in my bands than I was able to in France in some ways. So, yeah, long conversation.
Thank you. Let's see. Maybe we have a couple of other questions. Geraldine, would you like to speak?
Thanks, Jeremiah. I just wanted to make a short comment and say how wonderful it is that you've brought along a scholar, yourself, a musician and a creative artist and an archivist, because we made a point when we created this international forum of including archivists as an important part, but archivists are only important if scholars are enabled to look at what's in there, and scholars are only worthwhile looking at the stuff if the stuff can be published, performed, etc. So you have formed that nice triangle for us. So great, good on all of you.
Thanks so much, Geraldine, and thank you for all the work that you do to foster this space. The COZ is Geraldine's brainchild, and we're grateful to you for the incredible and beautiful work you do. Thank you, Geraldine. Mark, did you want to say something? Oh, I'm sorry. I see there are about two more people after that. I see you guys, Judy and Malcolm. You guys are here. So we'll yeah.
So thank you all. This is just wonderful, and we're so grateful to Jeremiah and our center at UCLA for the conversations and bringing weekly insights into Jewish music and the articles.
There's a terrible curse that plagues guitar players once they...
On what he wrote on the two of you is really just so wonderful for many people to see. You know, it occurs to me in just thinking about the time that I've been involved with this, and sort of getting into the New York klezmer scene by going to klez camp, you know, in the 90s, and sort of seeing one generation and another generation, maybe perhaps third generation, get involved in klezmer music. And I think that there's this pioneering spirit that each generation has. And I think that you're all really pioneers of the digital space in the digital environment, which is just, you know, more native to a younger generation than perhaps it is to my generation. So my question to each of you is, what do you need to really continue the work that you're doing? I mean, there's this certain sense that, you know, opportunity, money, I mean, there's some basic things that we know that we all need that there's not enough of. But from like this kind of brass tacks, kind of concrete thinking about how to move, you know, your work forward, what is it that you need?
I would say, I mean, I think it's not exactly answering your question maybe, but I would say that time, space, and money are the main things we need to do any kind of creative work, and also archival work, actually. But the thing that we already have is the community. That's for certain. So I wouldn't say that we need it in the sense that I feel like we already have a strong community, but we need to be able to get together, and we need to be able to share and exchange and learn from each other, continue doing that. There's more to this. It's not, yeah, I want to hear what.
Well, I want to say that, first of all, what do people need? What do people need? What do artists need? Artists always need money. They need money to be able to sit down and do the work that they need to do and that they should be doing. And ironically, I would say, in the age of all these incredibly powerful digital tools, which are amazing and are allowing us to do things that, were never possible before, even more so now, I think we need dedicated space to come together. And I think obviously we're all feeling that now after having been so physically isolated for so long. I miss the times when I would come in, I would have an excuse to come into the YIVO Sound Archive because, I might have a question, and that I would, see Lauren, and I would see Eléonore, and I might see Eddie, and, and then I would ask a question, and, the wheels would start spinning, because a lot of the creative process comes from, surprises and accidents and running into somebody. And you don't do that using digital tools so much. You do it by having human interactions in real space. So I think we all really feel the lack, or we're missing dedicated spaces where people can come together and exchange ideas and be next to each other and experience life together. Jeremiah, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what Rokhl and Eléonore said. I mean, I think there's kind of a sense that there is a missing channel of getting resources to Jewish artists and intellectuals, and that institutions do kind of a touch and go job of creating opportunities for funding. It's not that they don't exist, but they are irregular and inadequate, and you have everybody running around trying to make small amounts of money. There's a kind of an economic poverty to the Jewish cultural life, which is sort of strange. It doesn't really make sense that the Jewish community can't support its artists. And so that's an ongoing problem. Having there be more opportunities for communal grants, for festivals and performances, and better networks of distribution. But I mean, a part of it comes from a lack of I don't think it's from a lack of interest, but just a lack of will on the part of institutions to partner with people who are not clergy. I think perhaps that's part of it. Like a synagogue will certainly employ a rabbi and possibly a cantor, but even that's not a given anymore. But they are unlikely to employ a poet or a writer or a sound archivist. And why is that the case, right? I mean, there are many Jewish institutions that have the resources to be able to do that kind of work. So that's sort of a part of a larger conversation about what is the future of a Jewish professional, right? What will Jewish professionals do for the community in the future, and what are the needs that need to be addressed that are currently not being addressed, and how can connections better be made between the people and the intellectuals of the community, and the artists and intellectuals of the community. And I wanted to get to Judith Panolis. I'm sorry, you had a question a while ago.
Oh no, I was just wanted to agree with you about Geraldine's contribution for so many years, creating not only the COZ, but before that, all of the institutions. And one of the things, and the institutions that support scholarship and the institutions that support young people becoming involved, and festivals and things that you just all mentioned, for many years. And I think it takes infrastructure. And one of the things that Geraldine has contributed to is the creation of an infrastructure in her communities. And that is part of what creates the spaces and the money and the ability to have these artists in these spaces. That's just my comment. We don't have enough of that in the different institutions around the United States. We have many, many infrastructures, and they're splintered, and that's one thing that the internet now, or these Zoom meetings, have started to create the ability for different communities in very different geographic and time zones to come together and have artists and people who are interested in these things that can then go out into their own communities. So that cross-pollination of ideas and information has really been very powerful, I think.
If I could come in there, one of the most powerful things we ever did as the Jewish Music Institute was we were able to get a Millennium Grant from the Millennium Commission of £250,000. And it was specifically to give grants to individuals for projects in Jewish music that they could not have done otherwise. And there was, we worked with the Millennium Commission to create the criteria of which who could apply, what they could apply for. And they could apply for travel, they could apply for learning a new instrument, they could apply for writing a novel, they could apply for creating a band and putting a CD together. And we gave grants of just between £1,000 and £4,000 to 60 people. Now, so many of those people became the Jewish music professionals in the UK today, because it kickstarted something. It gave them the space to do it. Now, I saw Elana was here. Elana Kravitz was one of the people who got a Millennium Award to go to America and study with Deborah Strauss, and who is the other famous klezmer violinist. So she went to learn how to make a klezmer capella. Today, Elana is Mrs. Klezmer in the UK. She runs workshops, she teaches, she runs the fantastic London Klezmer ensemble. She's doing, and I feel if something like perhaps Mark the Milken could create awards that people have to apply for the projects, and you have a team who will sort that. And not only did we just give them money, there was a scheme where every project was monitored and was mentored. We gave everybody somebody to work with, somebody who was writing a piano concerto. We put him together with an established composer, and that was, not taking a huge amount of money for anybody, but kickstarting something that has traction and that provides the nourishment for the next generation. There was something else I wanted to say, but I've forgotten, so maybe I'll come back later. Thank you.
Can I say one thing about Elana? Because she during the pandemic, she started this incredible project with klezmer violinists from all around the world, around the manuscripts of Moshe Berigovsky, of the volume 4 of Nigunim, which is not published. And she couldn't share the copy of the manuscript that she had because of rights issue or whatever. But what she did is she shared tiny fragments of it to a lot of people and asked them to record it. So at the end, it was a way to publish an archive to which access was difficult by engaging community of creative musicians. It was an incredible project. It was so uplifting in the middle of it was like really in the thick of the pandemic. It was it was amazing. And parallel to this, I mean, there were other projects, but the Klezmer Institute is doing incredible work that also is like based on crowdsourcing and community engagement with archives. And there's a lot going on with that. But none of this is also, I mean, it's true, none of this is well funded or sufficiently funded for sure. So yeah, thank you, Geraldine, for your work.
I apologize. This is terrible because I'm was convening this session, but I have to leave, and I forewarned Phil about this. But I think that it would be wonderful for everyone to continue without me, if that's is that okay, Phil? Or no? Rokhl says I can't go.
How are we gonna survive without you? I think we'll be fine. Yes.
Well, it's more like how can I survive without all of you guys? But it was wonderful to see you all, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you all in the future. And thank you so much, Phil, and thank you so much, Eléonore and Rokhl, and great to see you all. Okay.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, I'll take over convening questions as we have a couple left. Jeff has had his hand up for a little while.
Hi, thanks to both of you for sharing your music. Rokhl, I saw your piece when it first came out. I loved it, Eléonore. I did not get a chance to see yours until today, so glad to have the chance to just hear more about your work. My question is, I would say even starting with Mickey Katz, since that's where we started, up through Klezmer Revival, and from what I gather today, it seems that Yiddish, at least within the realm of the kind of mainstream American Jewish community, has had a kind of subversive valence to it. And I'm just curious if you think that that's still the case, and if that's to what extent that informs your approach to the work that you're doing.
Well, you know, I find it's funny, even though I'll say that like Mickey Katz had a subversive edge, but I always caution at the same time that Yiddish unto itself is not subversive. It's just a language, and often it had a very conservative and at times reactionary valence to it too. It has the potential today to be countercultural, you might say. But people do many different things with Yiddish, which I think is great. What I find disturbing is that oftentimes American Jews will hear Yiddish, or even just the thought of it, they find it automatically to be subversive in a very negative way, that it's dangerous. We all have friends who have had these experiences where, whether it's covert or overt, they're invited into mainstream Jewish spaces and then they're told, like, you need to check the Yiddish at the door, because there is something subversive about it, that it will subvert the agenda of those institutions of inculcating young American Jews. And I find that very disturbing. That's just my own point of view.
I mean, I think there is a space to nurture with secular or not so secular, but a Yiddish culture that is, I don't know, I want to call it like universalistic, or like that can express anything we want, and that can incorporate everything that people that want to express themselves in it are, which can be also other things. It is, I have to say, I don't know if it's subversive, but I have to say it's a little bit of a strange cultural place to be in, to carry that.
So I didn't mean to suggest that it's only subversive. It just seems that's often kind of the first reaction to it, as Rokhl was saying, and just it strikes me that 70 plus years after Mickey Katz, you know, it still seems to kind of have this attachment to it. So thank you.
Katz hit a lot of resistance from mainstream Jewish life, that he was considered too vulgar or too Yiddish or too whatever
Sure.
for a lot of places. Absolutely.
We have maybe on the back of that, there's a parallel question from Malcolm. Malcolm, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read out what's in the chat there?
Well, I put something a bit lengthy in the chat. Actually, first I just want to say thank you so much for a really interesting session, and particularly to Jeremiah, who's no longer here, for introducing the examples. But actually, my question was sort of stimulated by Eleanor's song. I just was really interested in the metrical shifting that was going on in the song, and I was just thinking what I was wondering what you were doing, but it was a sort of an interesting to try and a sort of a game. I was trying to sort of think, if this was an art song, you know, does it fall into the art song category or the folk song? And I think maybe that's a completely false type of way of looking at it. One shouldn't put that in a sort of a particular frame. And whereas in, let's say, the 20s, you have Yiddish theater and cantorial music spilling over into sort of Yiddish song and Yiddish theater, but then also people are trying to create art song using Yiddish as a language, like German or French or Russian. So you have the concert hall type of Yiddish song. And I was wondering in terms of the whole type of vast field of, you know, where you place yourself, you know, and where would you draw on when you're talking about reinterpreting sources, as Jeremiah was doing, you know, does what we call art song at all part of that? Or is it something other? Is it something separate? You know, are you drawing on that? Are you reinterpreting only sort of the klezmer folk type of Yiddish, or is it you know, that was sort of my basis. So the first question was like, what were you doing? It was really interesting. I couldn't find I was working out, it just floated along, and I was trying to work out, you know, is this a waltz? Is it a lullaby? Is it, you know, and it was very, very nice. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I love your question. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by metrical shifts, but the rhythm that I'm using is a Romanian rhythm. It's like foray rhythm, so it's more reminiscent of kind of Lautari song, actually, this style of like having the rhythm and then a melody that is kind of slower on top of it. It's also not a very fast rhythmic form, but the melody is kind of floating on top of it. But to respond, like what I was saying earlier about just freeing myself and expressing myself as who I am as a whole. Like, so I grew up in France. I had direct close direct contact with my grandparents, who were Yiddish speakers from Lithuania. My mother was born in Lithuania. So, and I decided when I was a teenager to learn Yiddish because I had the feeling I would need it to express myself at some point. But I listened to all sorts of things. And so I'm sure that studying Yiddish songs informs, especially in the poetry of the song and the text. Yes, there is probably some kind of imagery that draws from art songs, if we may call it that way. But for the music, like I listen to a lot to Georges Brassens, to the singer Lassa de Sala, who unfortunately passed away very young, but she was in Paris. She lived in Paris when I was there. She's a Canadian Mexican songwriter, amazing singer, and I listened to her a lot. I listened to a lot of Brazilian music. Actually, the harmony was inspired by a Brazilian song. I think, like, as a songwriter, I just sort of made the conscious thought, choice that I will not limit myself in any ways and just write with who I am. And this song, like also Rokhl said, I wrote it for myself. It's true. Like it was a very, it was a song of comfort for me. Like I like listening to it because it gives me comfort. So I hope it does that for others too. But so
yeah, so it's a really rich. You've widened the whole sort of the influences, the cross influences and things considerably. Like the Yiddish coming to confrontation with all these other different.
Yiddish is there, I think, as a poetical ground, and but yeah, there is the Romanian thing, and it's a language, as Rokhl said. It doesn't have to limit myself in a specific genre or style, and yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened.
Right. That's really interesting. Thanks.
Have we got any more questions or comments, or are we gently drawing to a close here? I think that might wrap up very nicely then, unless Rokhl or Eléonore, if you have anything else you'd like to add that hasn't been said that you're bursting to say. I think you're muted. Need to unmute, Rokhl. Oh, there you go.
I'm just very honored to be included in the musician and musicologist space, because I'm neither, as I said, but it's really fun to put a foot in, and also to see all these folks, some of whom I know and don't. So just thank you so much. It's been really fun.
Well, thank you for coming. It strikes me it's a very fluid space anyway, that takes in music and takes in language and takes in poetry and literature and archives and, you know, and cultural spaces in general, which can only be to the good. Great. Okay.
I could also say I'm neither a musician nor a musicologist nor a Yiddishist or anything.
But you're a tour. You're a tour.
You're your own category. You're a Geraldine.
Thank you so much. I'm also very honored.
All right, great. On that note, I'd like to thank very much Rokhl and Eléonore, and in his absence, Jeremiah, for convening this. And stay in touch. If you guys, I don't think you've been on in one of these before. If you want to spread the word about future ones, then please do. In fact, Eléonore is doing one with Mark Slobin in the new year as well. So we'll see you then. If not before.
What's next week, Mark? Phil? Next
week is Charles Heller and Josh Markovitz, I think. Who Killed Hazanut? There you go. There's a nice, nice non-provocative title for us.
That's a great title.
Good.
So I'll hopefully see at least some of you there. Great. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
See you.